Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our first ever virtual IAIS annual conference and today's IAIS Town Hall. We have over 1,000 people registered for our annual conference this year who are joining us from all over the globe. Before we start, I would like to take a moment just to remind everyone of some housekeeping rules. First, to maintain audio quality, all participants are on listen-only mode. However, we are keen to hear from you. So I would encourage participants to contribute your question using the question function. Lastly, the event will be recorded and shared on the IAIS's website. I would like to take a moment to wish everyone continued health and well-being in these challenging times. This year certainly has unfolded differently than any of us could have predicted. The COVID-19 pandemic has cast a long shadow over 2020, presenting us with unprecedented social and economic challenges. However, our members responded rapidly, assessing and helping to mitigate the impact on insurance markets they supervise to maintain financial stability and the protection of policyholders. So far, it is reassuring to see that the insurance sector has remained financially and operationally resilient. This resilience is reflective of the sophisticated risk management of insurers, helped by the important reforms implemented by IAIS members since the 2008 financial crisis. And of course, guided by the agreements on global standards reached at the IAIS. Our virtual conference today and tomorrow will allow us to look back at IAIS activities in this unique year and to look ahead to the IAIS's future work program, including key emerging risks, trends, and opportunities facing the sector. We will start today's meeting with opening remarks from Vicky Supporta, who I'm very pleased to report was re-elected as chair of the executive committee yesterday. Jonathan Dixon, our Secretary General, will then share an update on the IAIS's roadmap for 2021. Following that, the chairs from our parent committees will update on the work of their respective committees over the past year. We will then close today's town hall with plenty of time for questions and answers. Then last, but certainly not least, we will announce our Distinguished Fellows for 2020. I will now hand over to the IAIS's Exco Chair, Vicky Supporta, and thank you again for joining. I look forward to the discussions over the coming 2 days.
Thank you so much, Connor. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. I'm very pleased that despite the challenges that Connor set out, we have been able to meet today, even virtually. Indeed, a positive outcome of the need to change arrangements for the annual conference has been inclusivity. As Connor said, today we have more people registered for this event than ever before. Thank you for your commitment. When we concluded our annual conference in Abu Dhabi last year, we agreed a package of reforms to maintain the resilience of the insurance sector for the future. The reforms had been in the making for a number of years. At the time, we imagined that our focus for 2020 would be on the timely implementation of these reforms. Little did we know. With the onset of COVID-19, we quickly pivoted, we had to, adjusting our work plan to focus on the impact of the pandemic. This covered two aspects in particular: assessing COVID-19 risks to the global insurance sector and helping our members to respond to the challenges of the pandemic. The experiences of this year has highlighted the importance of the reforms we agreed last year. They have provided us with a common international language and common concepts with which to communicate and analyze risks to the insurance sector. They have provided us with data and information and structures about risk assessment. And while many elements of the reforms that we finalized last year are still being implemented, we have continued to maintain momentum as we implement them further. Just a few highlights. As you know, ComFrame establishes supervisory standards and guidance for the effective group-wide supervision of internationally active insurance groups, or IAIGs. Common international standards are essential for the effective cross-border supervision of the safety and soundness of global insurers. Second, the Insurance Capital Standard, or ICS, being developed as part of ComFrame, has created, as mentioned, a common language for supervisory discussions of group solvency of IAIGs. As you know, ICS started a 5-year monitoring period in January this year. This year has presented a real-life stress test, more demanding than many would have considered we would have seen over the monitoring period, given the unprecedented nature of the economic impacts of COVID. Our Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group is currently working through the results from the first year of the monitoring period. The current situation makes participation in the monitoring period for ICS even more important, as we really need to test the adequacy and robustness of supervisory tools in times of market stress as we had this year, particularly the first part of this year. The holistic framework provides an enhanced set of supervisory policy measures and powers of intervention and an annual global monitoring exercise. As a result, we had in place a framework that helped us this year to rapidly analyze the risks posed to the insurance sector by COVID. In short, while there seems still some way to go in fully implementing the reforms announced last year, we can see that they have already provided us with a framework to help maintain the resilience of the insurance sector, a framework that has been useful this year. Our work is starting to bear fruit. Now, as we reach the end of what has been a turbulent year, what conclusions can we reach about the resilience of the insurance sector? In 2020, as I mentioned, we used the framework developed for the global monitoring exercise to collect targeted data at the global level from insurance groups and supervisors on a quarterly basis. The results up to the first half of 2020 show that so far the insurance sector this time around has acted as a shock absorber rather than as a shock amplifier of vulnerabilities. Solvency ratios generally continue to be well above jurisdictional capital requirements, although there have been dents on earnings and profitability. At the same time, this is no time for complacency. We need to continue to be vigilant. As we look forward to 2021, while the rollout of vaccines provides a welcome signal that the international community will be able to take control of COVID-19 next year, we will continue to feel the economic pressures of COVID for some time to come. For the insurance sector, continued economic challenges will weigh on investment portfolios in the short term, and perhaps even in the medium term, and the continuation of the low for long, much longer than we envisaged, environment will create additional pressures within a longer time horizon. Accordingly, a key focus of the IAIS's future work plan will be on the assessment of vulnerabilities and our contribution as IAIS in the maintenance of global financial stability. Lastly, to mention that despite the challenges posed by COVID, during the course of 2020, we also made steps forward on our key emerging themes that we identified with our new strategic plan last year. On technology, we published a paper on big data analytics. On cyber risk, we will be publishing very shortly a report on sustainable cyber underwriting in the coming weeks. On climate, with the publication of our comprehensive application paper carried out by the Sustainable Insurance Forum, we made good progress in supporting our members as they take action in their jurisdictions to address the risks from climate change. Our work on financial inclusion progressed further with our continued strong partnership with Access to Insurance and the creation of our Financial Inclusion Forum. And we created an operational resilience task force with work focused initially on third-party outsourcing and insurance sector cyber resilience. Our discussion today will be part of our ongoing engagement on these key issues of the next 12 months, hopefully in person before too long. I look forward to your questions later in this town hall. I will now like to hand over to Jonathan, Secretary General of the IAIS. And before I do so, I would like to also make an announcement that Jonathan, we are very, very happy as IAIS EXCO to say, has agreed to renew his contract that was coming to an end this year for another 3 years and to stay at the helm of the IAIS as we navigate these choppy waters to sunnier uplands. Thank you very much. Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much, Vicky, and likewise, very happy to have you at the helm as well. So happy about the continuity of leadership there. And thank you for those remarks. Let me now turn to our future focus and key themes for 2021. So we have set out some ambitious plans for our work next year. And our roadmap has 4 main elements. If we can turn to the next slide, there we go. So first of all, risk assessment. Secondly, finalization and implementation of key reforms, including our holistic framework, ICS. Thirdly, peer exchange and supervisory guidance on emerging and accelerating trends. And lastly, implementation support and assessment. And let me spend a little bit of time speaking to each of those. So firstly, on risk assessment, so clearly the impact of COVID-19 on the global insurance sector will continue to be a key focus next year. As Vicky mentioned earlier, our global monitoring exercise, the results of which we will be publishing very soon, highlight the continued resilience of the insurance sector in the first half of 2020. But vulnerabilities still linger, and to help maintain this resilience, it's essential that supervisors have forward-looking approaches to analyze any potential systemic risk and emerging and accelerating trends on the horizon that have the potential to have a significant impact on the sector. So that's why our work on a target assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on the insurance sector will continue next year based on 2020 Q4 data. And we'll also activate our regular GME to inform our collective discussion on potential systemic risk in the insurance sector. Secondly, on finalization and implementation of key reforms, starting with the holistic framework. In 2021, we'll continue our work to assess the consistent implementation of the supervisory material related to the holistic framework. This implementation assessment started this year in 2020 with a baseline assessment, and will move to a more intensive targeted jurisdictional assessment of 10 significant jurisdictions next year. The IAIS's assessment of implementation will help inform the FSB's review of the effectiveness of the holistic framework in November 2022. Next, the Insurance Capital Standard, or ICS. So this will enter the second year of the ICS monitoring period next year. And this will provide us with the opportunity to continue to learn from the stresses that the COVID crisis has presented. We anticipate that participation by insurance groups in the monitoring period will continue to grow across all regions. Discussions of ICS in supervisory colleges are due to kick off in the coming months, which signifies an important next phase of the ICS work in terms of getting a supervisory perspective on the usefulness of ICS as a tool for cross-border supervision of insurance groups. We'll also continue work to develop criteria to assess whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS, informed by feedback on the draft high-level principles that are currently out for comment. Thirdly, peer exchange and supervisory guidance on emerging and accelerating trends. So we, the IAIS, we develop supporting material to assess issues of relevance to insurance supervisors and to provide application guidance for implementation of agreed standards. Next year, we will finalize various supporting material on macroprudential supervision, supervisory colleges, and resolution powers and planning, amongst others. We'll also develop our work on emerging and accelerating trends. Firstly, in the area of technological innovation and cyber risk, our executive committee has underscored that this is a key focus, if not the key focus, for the period ahead, given the incredible acceleration of change in technology and its application in the insurance sector. And we will continue to further develop our strategy in this regard in the early part of next year. Our FinTech Forum will undertake a series of deep dives that will consider the impact of various technological innovations on the insurance sector and on insurance supervisors. The advent of a new normal characterized by increased remote working and digitalized business platforms has also reinforced the need for supervisors to have the appropriate skills, tools, and strategies necessary to harness technology for more effective and efficient supervision going forward. And we hope to put out some insights on these issues very soon. Consistent with the theme of this annual conference, climate risk and sustainability will continue to be a strategic priority for the IAIS. We'll finalize our comprehensive guide for insurance supervisors on how to apply our standards to the specific risks posed by climate change, and we'll publish a special report later next year which will consider potential financial stability risks arising from insurers' investment exposures to climate-related risks. Together with our partner, the Sustainable Insurance Forum, and key stakeholder groups such as the IDF, we will be focused on developing a strong insurance sector message for the COP26 discussions at the end of next year. I'm also pleased to announce that yesterday, the IAIS continued its leadership in this space by publishing our own environmental policy. This policy, which I think is the first of its kind amongst our standard-setting peers, will guide the IAIS's own performance on environmental issues, including strategic objectives and metrics to monitor and report on progress to ensure we're held accountable in the reduction of our carbon footprint. Lastly, in light of the fact that the IAIS has a broad membership with insurance supervisors from more than 200 jurisdictions, our priority issues also include financial inclusion, market development, and addressing the protection gap. Our Financial Inclusion Forum will help facilitate the sharing of perspectives and good practices on proportionate regulation and supervision in support of inclusive insurance markets. And we'll also work with our partner, the Access to Insurance Initiative, to provide practical capacity support to supervisors around the world as they seek to address this issue. Other exciting areas of work for next year in this area include generating supervisory perspectives on solutions to the pandemic risk protection gap, a project aimed at supporting our members from emerging markets and developing economies to transition to risk-based supervision, and a focus on diversity and inclusion in the insurance sector. If the crisis has taught us anything, it's that many of these themes, which were already fast-moving pre-COVID, are now accelerating even more. And that's why all of these topics will be reflected in our 2021 to 2022 roadmap, which will be published in early 2021. Lastly, on implementation support and assessment, we, together with our partners, the A2II, the FSI, the Toronto Centre, will continue to reinforce our considerable program of support for our members to help them implement our standards, including training, peer exchange platforms, and implementation assessment exercises. And we plan to further extend this next year. So to conclude, this has been an incredibly busy year, and 2021 is looking to be no different, I'm afraid. It's been difficult, I think, to give justice to all of the issues we've covered and plan to cover next year in the time allowed. But to get a fuller picture of the IAIS's work, I would encourage all of you to follow us on our LinkedIn profile, where we regularly provide updates on our work. So that's it from me. We'll now hear from the chairs of the IAIS's parent committees, who will be able to provide a bit more detailed information on our work across these different areas. First, we'll hear from Peter Braumüller, Chair of the Implementation and Assessment Committee, then Dieter Hendricks, Chair of our Macroprudential Committee, and last but not least, from Gary Anderson, Chair of our Policy Development Committee. Thank you very much. I look forward to the very interesting times over the next 3 years. And over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope everybody can hear me well. A warm welcome from my side. Happy to be with you at the occasion of this year's annual conference, also in the new format. I would like to point out that start with the strategic plan of the IAIS for 2020 up to 2024. And this strategic plan highlighted the pivot towards a great focus on implementation activities. And in order to deliver on these strategic activities, the IAIS adopted the so-called Coordinated Implementation Framework, which set forth 4 pillars. So this time not 3, but 4 pillars of the IAIS implementation strategy. The first, that is implementation monitoring and assessment. The second one, supervisory cooperation. Thirdly, capacity building. And finally, sharing supervisory practices. And I will lead you through the key recent activities alongside these 4 pillars. On the first one, the implementation, monitoring and assessment pillar, the IAIS has strengthened its assessment activities at 3 different levels. We have self-assessment, we have peer reviews, and we have member assessments. And last year, the IAIS approved and launched a beta version of an online self-assessment tool developed in partnership with the A2II. I think a very major step forward. During 2020, the IAIS and A2II will continue to work together to further develop this tool, and this will go on in the future. This year, we finalized a peer review process on standards related to corporate governance and risk management. namely ICPs 4, licensing, 5, suitability of persons, 7, corporate governance, and 8, risk management and internal controls. The aggregate report was published in June this year. Further PRP on ICP 19, conduct of business, is ongoing and expected to be finalized in 2021. And finally, a second pilot member assessment was finalized in June, covering the Kingdom of Morocco. Member assessments provide in-depth evaluation of the jurisdiction's observance level of IAIS principles and standards. A new member assessment focusing on Mexico has recently started. So while the previous activities I just mentioned in this first pillar refer to the more general assessment of standards, the IAIS has also started monitoring the implementation of policy measures and standards comprising the IAIS's holistic framework for the assessment and mitigation of systemic risk in the insurance sector. And two types of assessments comprise this holistic framework implementation assessment process. First of all, there is the so-called baseline assessment, or how we call it BLA, that was carried out earlier this year for 25 jurisdictions. As can be inferred from its name, the BLA provides the IAIS with the baseline for further evaluations. And the second part, the so-called targeted jurisdictional assessments, or TJAs, that are scheduled to take place for 10 jurisdictions in 2021 and 2022. Now let me move on to the second of the four pillars, which is supervisory cooperation. 2020 marked the 25th anniversary of the IAIS Multilateral Memorandum of Understanding, the MMOU, and the addition of the 75th signatory. The MMOU signatories now represent 76% of global gross written premiums. While more IAIS members interested in joining the MMOU, we expect the growing trend to continue, particularly with the addition of members from emerging markets and developing economies. Let me move on to Pillar 3, which is, in our case, the capacity building. Some of the issues have already been mentioned by the Chair and the Secretary General. The travel restrictions put in place due to the COVID-19 pandemic prompted a shift towards online trainings and a change in training priorities for our members. And that was really done very quickly and successfully. The IAIS and its partners, particularly the A2I and the FSI, were able to adapt existing online programs and develop new engagement opportunities to meet the increased demand by the IAIS members. Among the achievements in these extraordinary circumstances, I would like to highlight the record enrollment of over 400 participants for the 2020 cohort of the IAIS FSI First One program, and the launch of a series of dialogue events for the A2I focused on supervisory responses to COVID-19. And I would also like to thank our partners for their commitment to build high-quality supervisory capacity for our members, particularly also those in EMDE jurisdictions. Finally, number 4, sharing good supervisory practices and facilitating the understanding of supervisory issues is one of the 5 high-level goals, strategic goals of the association, and also, as I mentioned, the 4th pillar of our implementation strategy. In this regard, I like to underscore 2 ways in which the implementation committee contributed to this goal. First, through the creation of forums. The early success of the FinTech Forum as an online platform enabling agile exchange of knowledge and discussion of practical experience by subject matter experts spurred the transition of the IAIS's financial inclusion and pensions work into forums in 2020. With a predominantly virtual formats, a member-driven work plan, these forums are in a position to support our members in tackling key issues, including those arising from the pandemic. Second, In the development of application papers, I would just like to highlight one paper in particular, which is currently out for consultation, the application paper on the supervision of climate-related risks in the insurance sector. This draft paper is a joint project with the Sustainable Insurance Forum, a leadership group of insurance supervisors convened by the United Nations Environment Programme. The draft application paper provides background and guidance on how the IAIS supervisory material can be used to manage the challenges and opportunities arising from climate-related risks. And some of the topics refer to our core principles, which are in particular the supervisory review and reporting ICP, number 9, ICP 7 on corporate governance, ICPs 8 and 16 on risk management, ICP 15 on investments, and ICP 20 on disclosures. The draft application paper is undergoing public consultation, as I mentioned, and feedback is invited still until the 12th of January next year. You will find the information in our website. So I try to be brief. That was an overview of the activities of the Implementation Assessment Committee over 2020. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Dieter Hendricks, the chair of the Macro-Prudential Committee. Dieter, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. And first of all, of course, a warm welcome to all participants. Also from my side, it's fair to say it's been a busy year for the Macro-Prudential Committee. In November 2019, the IAIS adopted a holistic framework. Welcoming the framework, the FSB also decided to suspend the identification of globally systemic imported insurers until November 2022. As a quick reminder, the holistic framework consists of 3 key components, 3 key pillars. First, an integrated set of supervisory policy measures for macro-prudential purposes. Second, an implementation and assessment of the supervisory material. And third, the global monitoring exercise, or GME, which is our IAIS risk assessment framework. 2020 was now supposed to be the first year of implementation of the holistic framework, and of course this implementation has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, and as already touched upon by Vicky in her introductory remarks, we have repurposed the GME framework to, instead of conducting a regular systemic risk analysis, assess the impact of COVID-19 on the global insurance sector, based on a targeted data collection, both from supervisors and participating insurers. The 2020 global monitoring exercise thus focused on assessing the impact of COVID-19 on 5 key areas for insurers: solvency, profitability, liquidity, and the asset and liability side. The analysis was based on data from, let's say, close to 60 of the largest international insurance groups and close to 40 insurance supervisors, in total covering more than 90% of global gross written premium, which is, I would call, highly representative of the global insurance market. Vicky provided you already with the key highlights of this year's global monitoring exercise, but allow me to present the results a little bit in more detail here. First of all, an important observation already highlighted by both Vicky and Jonathan for us as supervisors is that although financial market volatility caused by the COVID-19 crisis in the first half of 2020 impacted the solvency and profitability of the global insurance sector, so far we have noticed that insurers have remained financially resilient. In other words, insurers' available capital resources generally remained well above jurisdictional capital requirements. Looking at the liability side, the results are highly heterogeneous. Some lines of business were impacted more than others. Depending on the business model of the insurers, premiums and claims have thus shown a varying impact to the COVID-19 crisis. On the asset side, the main impact on the asset portfolios of insurers was driven by the decline in equity prices, in particular noticeable at the onset of the crisis. We have also seen how COVID related decreases in investment returns have put significant pressure on the profitability of mainly life insurers. The perspective of a continued low, for some jurisdictions even negative yield environment is of course still a key challenge for the life insurance industry that will require our attention as supervisors, also in the context of the IAIS development. Here I would say we may also benefit from the experience of some Asian members within our community, which have been confronted with the issue of low interest rates for a longer period of time. Looking forward, I would say potential vulnerabilities remain. There are still existing uncertainties around the final duration and the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. The results that we share with you today are based on the data from the first half of 2020, but as also highlighted by Jonathan, we will continue to monitor the situation also per year end 2020. Vulnerabilities to keep a close eye on going forward include an analysis of the impact of a potential decrease in credit quality of insurance fixed income portfolios and an analysis of the impact of the continued and deepened low yield environment. We will look into these matters, of course, taking into account the long-term investment horizon and asset liability management cash flow matching perspective, which is typical for long-term investors such as insurers. You will, of course, be able to read more details in our Global Insurance Market Report, our GMAR, which I'm happy to announce is published later this month, still before the end of the year. And the report will be a special edition focusing, of course, on the impact of COVID-19 on the insurance sector. As also noted already by Vicky, this year we have also made considerable progress in the further implementation and operationalization of the holistic framework. In recognizing the importance of monitoring and managing liquidity risk for the proper operation of insurers, the protection of policyholders and financial stability, we've worked on 2 projects related to liquidity. First of all, in June this year, we finalized an application paper on liquidity risk management. As noted by Peter earlier, application papers do not set new standards, but provide background to IAIS supervisory material. In this case, background to these requirements in ICP 16 on enterprise risk management, which are specifically targeted at liquidity risk. These requirements apply, of course, to IAIGs as well as other insurers based on the nature, scale, and complexity of their activities that lead to increased liquidity risk exposure and risk amplification effects related to the size of the insurer. The paper provides concrete examples and guidance for supervisors on how to set proportionate requirements for insurer strategies, policies, and processes for managing liquidity risk. Secondly, we've recently published a consultation document on the development of liquidity metrics, where as part of a first phase, an exposure approach is now consulted. This work is part of the global monitoring exercise, as it will support the IAIS monitoring of risks. As announced in 2019, this is part of a 3-year process in which the IAIS is developing liquidity metrics that may work as an ancillary indicator as part of the individual insurer monitoring. As a reminder, ancillary indicators do not count towards the individual insurer systemic risk score. These liquidity metrics then serve as a tool for the IAIS to assess insurers' liquidity exposures. They will not be a binding requirement, but rather a monitoring tool, and they will help identify trends in insurer and insurance sector liquidity. We plan to publish a follow-up consultation document by the end of next year. As a reminder, feedback on the current document is still invited by the 7th of February 2021. Lastly, we are developing an application paper to support the implementation of ICP 24 on macroprudential supervision. As you may recall, we significantly revised ICP 24 last year as part of the holistic framework adoption to make sure it's better aligned with the holistic framework. Now we are developing guidance on supervisory practices related to ICP 24 and plan to publish the paper for consultation March next year. This paper will discuss items such as how to set up, perform data collection analysis, how to establish a framework for assessing systemic importance at both sector-wide and individual insurer level. We will try to give guidance on supervisory responses when a potential systemic risk is detected, and guidance on how to achieve transparency through reporting. it will also include concrete examples as, for instance, risk indicators, how to perform stress testing, how to set up risk dashboards for supervisors to apply in practice. I think I can stop my update here. I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A later on, and I will now hand over to Gary for an update on the work of the Policy Development Committee. Please, Gary.
Thank you very much, Peter, and I hope that you can hear me well. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. The Policy Development Committee is focused on the IAIS's broad policy work. Earlier this year, I was humbled to accept the baton as chair from our good friend and colleague, Lise Liebers. In November 2019, the IAIS agreed on ICS version 2.0 for the monitoring period, which started in January 2020. The Level 1 document with overarching principles and concepts for the annual confidential reporting of the reference ICS and additional reporting on GAP Plus and other methods was published in November 2019. The Level 2 document, with more detail than the Level 1 document and guidance on the specifications of the calculation and the expectations of the monitoring period, was published in March 2020. The Level 3 documents, which include the ICS technical specifications, templates, and other documents needed to complete the annual reporting, were published in early June. The United States and other interested jurisdictions are developing an aggregation method, or AM, to a group capital calculation. Although this is not part of the ICS version 2.0, the IAIS appreciates the significance of this development, and so is helping to collect data from the US and other interested jurisdictions that will aid in the development of the AM. During the first half of this year, the IAIS prepared packages for the ICS data collection and aggregation method data collection, which were both launched in April. We're currently finalizing a package of documents that will be circulated in December to group-wide supervisors for supervisory college discussions of the reference ICS and additional reporting. A volunteer workshop is being planned for February 2021 to discuss the initial results of the 2020 ICS data collection. In addition, the IAIS is exploring whether there should be a differentiated capital treatment of certain eligible infrastructure, both equity and debt, and strategic equity investments within the ICS. A dedicated task force was set up at the beginning of the year, and in September, the IAIS launched 2 stock take questionnaires, one for IAIS members and another one for the public. We do encourage people to respond to this consultation, which closes on the 7th of December. As regards currently ongoing public consultation on the draft definition of comparable outcomes and high-level principles, Vicki will say a few words about this topic in her remarks. But the next item I would like to cover are the activities related to ComFrame. Following adoption of ComFrame in November of 2019, the IAIS has been monitoring the identification of internationally active insurance groups by relevant group-wide supervisors. Upon adoption of ComFrame, group-wide supervisors committed to disclose publicly the identification of IAGs at the earliest possible opportunity, noting in some cases the disclosure may require legislative changes or regulatory action. In July, the IAIS published the register of IAGs publicly disclosed by their group-wide supervisors. This was updated in November to reflect subsequent disclosures, and as of today, 48 IAGs have been identified by relevant group-wide supervisors from 16 jurisdictions. Out of those 48 IAGs, 34 IAGs have been publicly disclosed by relevant group-wide supervisors from 12 jurisdictions. The IAIS will monitor the progress and will encourage those group-wide supervisors that have not yet disclosed the identification of IAGs to continue their efforts and to publicly disclose this information at the earliest opportunity. As announced last year, upon adoption of ComFrame, after an initial stage of ComFrame implementation, the IAIS will shift its focus to assessment of implementation of ComFrame. The IAIS held an initial discussion on the timing of ComFrame implementation assessment in October and agreed to start preparatory work in the second half of 2022 and to begin actual assessment activities in early 2023. Moving to supporting material, which aims to support observance of ICPs in ComFrame, in March, the IAIS published an issues paper on the use of big data analytics in insurance. The paper recognizes that increasing availability of data from multiple sources and enhanced data processing capabilities accessible to insurers may create opportunities for the benefit of insurers and policyholders alike. On the other hand, the growing use of complex algorithms and rapidly expanding ability of insurers to access more data could create or amplify specific risks. As a consequence, supervisors must consider appropriate and proportionate responses to such risks. Stakeholders demonstrated great interest in the themes highlighted in the paper. These trends and developments have also received magnified focus in light of digitalization accelerations experienced during the COVID-19 crisis. The IAIS is currently consulting publicly on an application paper on resolution powers and planning. It provides guidance on the introduction of a resolution framework, including triggers, resolution powers, the key elements in resolution planning and resolvability assessment, as well as coordination. Comments on this are due by the 5th of February 2021. The IAIS also continues work on an issues paper on Insurer Culture, which will explore the concept of Insurer Culture as a key intersection point for managing prudential and conduct risks against the backdrop of the insurance core principles. We expect to publish the paper for consultation in mid-2021. In 2020, the IAIS also established 2 subcommittees. The first one I already mentioned, namely Infrastructure Task Force. The second is the Operational Resilience Task Force, or ORTF, which will focus on identifying and assessing factors and developments that may affect operational resilience in the insurance sector. In particular, the immediate focus is on IT third-party outsourcing, insurance sector cyber resilience, and taking stock of and reviewing relevant best practices from both insurers and supervisors' perspectives. Over time, the group will also look to integrate lessons from COVID-19 on ensuring business continuity over extended period into supporting material. And with that, that concludes my remarks, and I'll hand it over to you, Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And thanks very much, Dieter and Peter, for this update of the hard work that the parent committees have been able to do under sort of very new circumstances. But you and your committees adapted very ably. Thank you for that. So as Gary said, there is one issue on which we are currently consulting, which is the draft definition and high-level principles to inform the criteria that will be used to assess whether the aggregation method that has been developed by the United States authorities provides comparable outcomes to the ICS, which is the Global Insurance Capital Standard. As a number of participants will know, this is completely in line with the agreement we made in Abu Dhabi in 2019. While the aggregation method is not part of the ICS as it has been agreed in previous years, the IAIS aims to be in a position by the end of the monitoring period, and now we've got 4 years left, to assess whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the insurance capital standard, the international one. This consultation that we published covers a draft definition of comparable outcomes and draft high-level principles that will inform the criteria that the IAIS is going to use to do this comparability assessment. Now, the draft high-level principles are derived from the specific areas of focus that were agreed in November 2019 and were published in 2019. So you will see quite a lot of sort of similarity, or you should see quite a lot of similarity between the areas of focus we published in November 2019 and in the consultation paper. The intention was to remain high level, as were the areas of focus at this stage, given that the granularity that we will need to enable us to do the comparability assessment will come with the criteria that we're going to be developing next year. So, as I said, following this consultation on the draft definition and the high-level principles, we will be developing the draft criteria. And the way that we're going to be doing it is that we're going to be drafting more detailed criteria for each high-level principle, and in such a manner that the aggregation method is neither precluded at the outset as an outcome equivalent approach to the ICS for measuring group capital, nor of course given a free pass. There will be a public consultation on the draft criteria in advance of the assessment of whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. The progress that has been made on comparable outcomes has, of course, been a team effort. It was done. The work was largely done through a task force, the ICS task force that I happen to chair, and on which all the three vice chairs are members, and who contributed significantly in getting to the outcome of the consultation paper. So given this, I would like now to hand over to our vice chairs, who will say a few words on this work. First, let me start with Norio. Over to you.
Thank you, Vicky. Good evening from Tokyo to everyone. My name is Norio Hida. I am the vice chair of the EXCO of IAIS. I would like to add a few words. First, it is quite important for the IAIS to deliver on time what it has publicly committed. It is important for IAIS as a global standard setter for the insurance sector to deliver the committed products in the spirit of the cooperation among members. In this respect, a successful delivery of the public consultation of the definition and high-level principles on comparability of the aggregation method with the ICS is definitely a significant milestone which the IAIS has accomplished. I'd like to celebrate the IAIS and its members for this achievement. Second, we are still in very early stage of entire process of the comparability assessment. The public consultation of the definition in high-level principles of the comparability that we have just launched last November will be followed by many more steps to deliver the comparability assessment result in 2024 as scheduled and as agreed during AGM in 2019. It is important to maintain the momentum. For that purpose, therefore, we would like to invite our fellow stakeholders for your constructive participation, comments, and proposals to the public consultation. Thank you very much. So hand over to you, David.
Thank you, Norio, and good morning, everyone, from the Sunshine State of Florida. Coming out of Abu Dhabi, the IAIS set an ambitious timeline for the overall ICS project during the monitoring period. And while COVID-19 has had an impact, I'm pleased that we were able to reach this year's milestone with the release of the definition and high-level principles for public consultation. Over the course of 2020, the discussion on comparability has been ongoing, which has allowed IAIS members to have a better understanding of one another's views. And regardless of whether the next phase of work continues virtually or in person, it is this spirit of openness, understanding, and collaboration that will help this project continue to move forward. As far as the high-level principles, hopefully they provide further elaboration on the areas of focus that were agreed in Abu Dhabi. In comparing the two, one can see some areas of focus needed more elaboration than others to get to high-level principles. Regardless, we hope this provides a good basis for feedback during the public consultation. Translating these principles to criteria that neither precludes comparability nor gives the AM a free pass will come with its challenges. So receiving thoughtful input and concrete suggestions from the public consultation to consider will be helpful as part of the process of developing practical criteria to be used for the comparability assessment. We look forward to continuing the momentum of comparability as well as the other aspects of the overall ICS project. 2021 will certainly be another busy year. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our third EXCO Vice Chair, Suzette. Suzette, over to you.
And good afternoon, everybody. Suzette Vogelsang. I'm the third Vice Chair of the IAIS EXCO, representing the emerging markets and developing economy jurisdictions. I fully agree that the consultation marks an important milestone. The size of the US market makes it all the more important to have a process by which the aggregation method will be assessed for comparable outcomes to the ICS. From an emerging market perspective, this work is extremely valuable. We do in our markets have a number of AIGs operating as subsidiaries in our jurisdictions, and thus having a global standard will provide us as emerging market jurisdictions with increased mutual understanding and greater confidence in cross-border supervision amongst host and home supervisors, and believe also that that will contribute to better cross-border dialogue. Thank you, Vicky. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Norio, David, and Suzette. And now back to Jonathan, who's going to be the ringmaster for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you also from my side to all the presenters for those rich presentations. It's clear it's been a very busy year. So we're now very keen to hear from you, the audience, in terms of questions. And a reminder, you can ask a question using the Q&A tool. Let me kick off by saying we did receive some questions from stakeholders in advance of today's call, and we're going to kick off with those questions. So the first up is a theme that came up in questions from both the IIF and JAFIA, which I'll ask Vicky to take a stab at, which is really asking for a little bit more detail on our climate risk theme. So what is the IIS's overall strategy, and what are your guiding principles with respect to climate risk in the insurance sector? So over to you, Vicky.
Thanks, Jonathan. Who from the panel would like to come in on this question?
And Vicky, I'm happy to fill in on this one as well. As you know, it's something we spent a lot of time on during our roadmap discussion. So happy to add a few thoughts if that would be helpful.
Yes, so, and perhaps why don't you do that, and perhaps then I sort of could follow up.
Great, perfect. So I think as we heard already in the presentation, so we've got two imminent deliverables. One is the application paper, which is out for consultation, and the other one is the special report on climate risk and financial stability, which we hope to have out towards the middle of next year. In addition to that, I think there is a broader issue around not only climate risk impact on the insurance sector itself, but also the role of the insurance sector in the broader economic transition to a carbon neutral position. And so I think this year there will also be a fair amount of attention to how can the sector play a role in supporting the move to a more sustainable economy. The core business of insurance is to understand risk, to generate risk intelligence. So the climate sector can clearly play a very important role in this area. And we're very keen to look at that message, that theme, in the run-up to COP26 as well. We have a very successful partnership with the Sustainable Insurance Forum, which also allows us to take a leadership role on this topic. The SIF is also moving to some broader sustainability issues, including biodiversity risk as well. And we also work very closely with other standard-setting bodies. So, for instance, contributing to the FSB's work on the financial stability impact of climate risk, and also ensuring that our work is coordinated with other standard-setting bodies, including our participation in the Network for Greening the Financial System, NGFS. So those are a few things to flag from my side. Vicky, back to you.
Colleagues might want to come in, but as highlighted, I think by Jonathan now, but also in the comments that were given earlier, I mean, essentially, I see, and I think the IAIS we see, three kind of big trends going on that will be affecting our industry, but also our industry can contribute to. This is technology, the protection gap, and climate. And we've already been the most active out of the sectoral financial standard setters on giving guidance to our supervisors and to monitoring on how to supervise climate risk, but also quite active in monitoring the insurance sector's adoption of the currently voluntary enhanced disclosure standards. And also, as Jonathan said, internally within our operations, I think we are the first of the sectoral standard setters to adopt our own sustainability policy with a focus on reducing our own carbon footprint. But this is what we've done so far. I mean, ahead of us, there is a big agenda. It's likely to be a big focus at the political level over the next year. And of course, we've got COP26 in Glasgow. So it is a big opportunity to demonstrate that we are ready as regulators to forestall the risks while also not stopping innovation and opportunities from the insurance sector to provide protection against these risks, and also invest in green technologies that will ensure that we meet the Paris targets. So that's kind of the overall big picture in the way that I think EXCO see it.
Thank you very much, Vicky. We'll now move on to another question, also from the IAF, which is on financial inclusion issues. So the IAIS roadmap describes financial inclusion issues quite broadly. Which aspects of financial inclusion is the IAIS prioritizing in its current work? And a suggestion that this is an issue that the IAC spends a good deal of time on, and that potentially Peter would like to take on.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Jonathan. Happy to take this question on. I think I want to take it from two sides. There is the one side we are always interested is more the supply side and more the demand side. On the supply side, we have worked now for more than 10 years with our partner on financial inclusion and inclusive insurance, which is the A2I, together with A2I, together with a group of development agencies. And we try to unite the efforts. We have strengthened the governance there. And I think A2I has proved, particularly in 2020, that we are able to easily adapt to the needs of supervisors. And the needs of supervisors, that's the second issue. We always struggled in the past to understand what is really the demand of the different supervisors. It's not exactly the same. It's more here and there. Differences from regions, differences from the status of their jurisdiction and their supervisory systems. So the second main focus we will have, besides continuing to work with the A2R new programs and new support for supervisors, is this, what I mentioned, the transition from the Financial Inclusion Working Group to the Financial Insurance Forum after the very good experience we have had with this forum type of group through the FinTech Forum. And I can report that we have had good response so far. The A2I is also supporting us in that direction. So to get the real priorities from supervisors around the world, and then put together the agenda which is most useful to supervisors on regionally or even globally. So that would be my first response. So it is reflected both in more detail. It will be reflected on the one hand in the work plan, in the roadmap with the fifth activities, and on the other hand on the work program of the A2II that is built up together with the IAIS. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Peter. We're on an IIF run, but they were very, obviously very prolific with the questions. And this is a question directed at the PDC, so to Gary. What aspects of conduct and culture are most pressing or key priorities for the IAIS?
Yeah, sure, Jonathan. Happy to take this one. So maybe it'd be helpful to highlight a couple of areas. One is we're working currently on an issues paper on insurer culture, which we do plan to publish in 2021. And the aim of the paper is to explore the importance of insurer culture as a key intersection point for managing conduct and prudential risks against the backdrop of the insurance core principles. This exploratory paper will also help inform the development of more detailed supervisory guidance on specific aspects relating to culture and conduct at a later stage. The other area that I'd highlight is that we also plan on developing supervisory guidance relating to the use of key indicators and advanced data gathering techniques to proactively monitor conduct risks across various markets. This project will also examine how COVID-19 has influenced the types of indicators or data required to ensure effective conduct supervision. This could include amplified supervisory focus on accelerated conduct trends relating to, for example, increasing digitalization, more innovative products, new business models, and changing customer expectations. So those are a couple of areas that I would highlight, Jonathan. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Right, next we have a question from the Geneva Association. COVID-19 has highlighted the impact of inequality. What work is the IAIS undertaking in this area? And I'll hand that to Vicky first. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, I mean, there's no question that COVID-19 has highlighted the impact of, has had differential impact on different communities, not only depending on their financial background and circumstances, but also according to their ethnic background, or even in some circumstances their gender. So, I mean, clearly, as insurance supervisors and as a global association of them, it's not kind of a primary kind of focus is to protect policyholders, to contribute to financial stability, and to have fair markets. And therefore, it's not kind of a primary role to address these extraordinary and very worrying, I say as a citizen, trends. However, we can contribute to them, and I have in mind at least three things. One is, of course, that some is around trying to close the protection gap. Globally, the protection gap in traditional life and non-life insurance is growing rather than closing, particularly in emerging and developing markets, while new risks associated with cyber, climate, and the pandemic are largely, I'm talking at macro level, without cover. Closing this gap will provide social clear benefits, because it will ensure that more people around the world have protection when these nasty things happen. And it will also provide significant commercial benefits from the companies that can provide safe underwriting. Second, it's we have agreed that next year we will start work to consider diversity in the insurance sector, and how we can integrate that into our work. This work is still in a planning phase, but we will be able to provide more information next year. But issues that, just to give you a sense of the type of issues that we need to look at, is around how, for example, that there's some incredibly good things around artificial intelligence and machine learning, and opportunities that to the insurance sector, which could lead to broader inclusion and closure of the protection gap. But there are also risks, and risks that might lead to discriminatory outcomes, that might lead to some communities that are already more vulnerable becoming even more vulnerable, and therefore contributing to inequalities. The second issue is to what extent diversity can, for example, around boards and around senior management, can lean against groupthink and provide more challenge, and therefore increase resilience and accountability within firms. This is an issue that some jurisdictions have taken action already, but one would need to look at the evidence before taking global action. And then I should say that within the IAIS, we have already taken some action to provide broader representation in our decision-making processes. And to some extent, the creation a couple of years ago of the third vice chair position, the role Suzette Fogelsang has as a representative of the EMDE region, is another example of how we have tried to be more inclusive in our own processes. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Vicky.
Back to you.
Thank you, Vicky. And let me also see whether Gary would like to add anything from a PDC perspective.
Sure, Jonathan. Thank you. And I think Vicky has hit the highlights. I think what we could add is that, as she noted, COVID-19 has certainly highlighted the challenges of diversity, inclusion, and accessibility to insurance products, that it's an issue across jurisdictions. And it's something that we as IAIS members could learn from others. As an example, we here in the United States as insurance supervisors are looking at a variety of aspects of race in insurance. And as we make our way through this work, we'd be happy to share that work with others. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Gary. Switching now to cyber issues. There's been a question about what is the latest on your cyber work. Gary.
Sure, happy to go again. And so a few things that I would highlight, and I can be brief. But one, obviously, this is a key issue for the IAIS, and is especially relevant given the significant developments in the fintech space. We will be publishing a report on sustainable cyber underwriting in the coming weeks. And the IAIS has recently established an operational resilience task force, which will focus on identifying and assessing factors and developments that may have may affect operational resilience in the insurance sector. And I'd say in particular, the immediate focus is on IT third-party outsourcing, insurance sector cyber resilience, and taking stock of and reviewing relevant best practices, both from the insurer side and the supervisor side and perspective. So over time, the group will look to integrate lessons from COVID-19 on ensuring business continuity over an extended period into some supporting material as well. So back to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And I think there was also a question through the chat function asking about the nature of the report on cyber underwriting. Just to say, give a little bit of background on that, is that it was really, I think, recognizing that while cyber insurance presently constitutes a relatively small but rapidly growing portion of the overall non-life insurance market, there are many issues here that need to be looked at from a supervisory perspective. And so for this reason, the IAIS, as a preparatory step really towards developing a strategic approach to how supervisory practices can foster sustainable cyber underwriting, decided to appoint what we call the Cyber Underwriting Small Group, which consists of experts from IAIS members as well as the OECD, to carry out a stock take on a literature review, as well as a stock take of current supervisory practices in different jurisdictions, and to consider implications for the future work of the IAIS, and ultimately to prepare a report with findings and recommendations for a strategic approach, as well as possible follow-up work for consideration by the executive committee. The EXCO earlier this year considered that report. They acknowledged the findings and supported the proposed further work in line with the findings of the report, and also agreed that there should be a public version of that report that is shared. So that's what we hope to release, as Gary said, in the coming weeks. It's not really for consultation. It's not a issues paper or an application paper. It's a sort of preparatory step. But I do think that will be a useful paper to start some conversations with our stakeholders and to have ongoing discussions as we move to look at further work over the next couple of years on that. Thank you. And with that, Actually, there's one last question which came through before, and then we'll move to, if you like, the live section, and that was on a topic that was touched on in the presentations, but maybe we can provide a bit more detail, and Vicky might help us with that. Is what can the IAIS do in terms of in the area of pandemic risk?
Yes. The pandemic risk raised questions that are not new questions, but it brought them to sort of, it highlighted questions around what is an insurable and what is not an insurable risk. So the pandemic risk, that the COVID was a global systemic risk, exogenous systemic risk, and we know from centuries now that insurance is good at pooling and diversification of risks, and there are limits to pooling and diversification of systemic risks. So we as supervisors, we will have to consider whether risk being taken by the firms that we supervise is sustainable from both a firm perspective and a broader macro perspective. And we also need to consider how much of that protection could be offered by private firms, and how much should be offered by the public sector. Now, when I say we need to consider, ultimately this is actually a big governments and government departments have a bigger role in this game than supervisors. But given that decisions that are going to be taken around this are going to have an impact on the sector, and also potentially an impact on the reputation of the sector, if it is felt that the sector is not doing its part in any public-private partnership, which then could have conduct and other reputational hits, then we do have a clear role as supervisors to play. So the question is, what can IAIS do? As a first step, we are going, the various initiatives that are being taken around the world. In the continent of Europe, there are initiatives taken at the European Union level, there are separate initiatives being taken at the UK level, and so on. There are also other initiatives. So we need to take a stock take of these initiatives, and analyze their features and share them amongst supervisors. It is possible, a preliminary sort of bird's eye view suggests that most of the initiatives involve public-private partnerships, but it is possible that market-based solutions may exist, although it's something that we need to investigate given the nature of the risks being systemic. But our early thought on this issue is that participation by insurances in this must involve a sense of having skin in the game, so that risks are priced and managed correctly. So that's it from me. I mean, this is an area that is going to run. It is a priority, as well as areas around the protection gap over the next phase of the strategic plan. So we encourage engagement by everyone interested in this issue. And we will also work together with Access to Insurance, our implementation partner, on this, who have going to do a series of webinars to explore with our members the pandemic risk protection gap further. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Vicky. So we're now going to move into the sort of live question section. And I think what we might kick off with is some questions on the comparability side of things, in that we haven't had any questions on that yet. So a couple of questions have come through. One sort of more general question about, I suppose, what is the IAIS looking for in terms of comments or response to the draft comparability definition and high-level principles? Is it a sort of combination of, what do people think about the principles, plus how should the principles be converted into more detailed criteria? Is sort of the general question. And then there was a specific question about how is the IAIS looking to define short-term fluctuations versus over the business cycle. And I guess this is really a question for the criteria. But those are what have come through so far. Perhaps whilst people are thinking about that, there was in fact, the first question that came through was quite a factual question, which I can help cover off, which was a question about will the planned June committee meetings and global seminar in Vancouver take place in person, and will the Sydney committee meetings and annual conference in November take place in person? So we haven't as yet communicated on that. It's the plan to do so soon, but I think we can take advantage of the fact that we have a very large audience to share that news. So a decision has been taken by the executive committee, and as you can imagine, with the continued uncertainties with COVID-19, a decision has been taken that it will not be possible to have an in-person meeting in Vancouver in June next year. And similarly, whilst we all hope that the situation will have improved a lot by November next year, it is also a very big ask to ask people to travel to Sydney at a time when there may still be a lot of uncertainties around travel and so on. So the host, APRA, has also, we've agreed with them that it's best not to hold that in person in Sydney next year. So what we're currently looking at are contingency plans, either a virtual event for our global seminar. For our annual conference, I think we are hopeful that we will be able to have an annual conference, even if it's on a scaled back basis in person. And so the default, of course, would perhaps be Basel or Switzerland, but we will be able to share more information on that in the coming months. But maybe we'll go back to the comparability questions and hand over to you, Vicky, to direct the answers.
Yes, thanks, thanks, Jonathan. So just to check, the first question was around how do we go from the principles that we have published to a fully blown comparability assessment. Was that the question?
Yeah, and what's the step in between in terms of how? Yeah.
So Yes, I mean why I mean if you look at this issue, we're taking a sort of very methodical and stepwise approach. So last year in Abu Dhabi, we said that this year we're going to look at high level principles that we need to agree on that need to be met in order to undertake, in order to go and before we go and develop criteria. And before we go, and the criteria are then going to be used to undertake the assessment of comparability. So we started last year with areas of focus. This year, we agreed draft principles for consultation, of course, and a draft definition of comparability that, to be frank, is exactly the same as the one that we had in 2019. However, the principles are more concrete than the area of focus. And now we're going to use these principles to develop more detailed criteria against each one of those principles. And then after we have developed criteria, and as I said, we're going to be consulting on these criteria next year, we are going, after we have finalized them, to use them to do the comparability exercise. So the detail is going to come next year. But I'll hand over to Gary because the criteria, just as a matter of governance, at the technical level are going to be undertaken by the Capital and Solvency working group that is a working group of the Policy and Development Committee that Gary chairs, and ultimately the Policy Development Committee will look at them before it recommends them to EXCO. So I'll hand over to Gary, who may also want to take on the second question, which was in relation to how do we define the business cycle, which is referred to in High Level Principle 1. Gary.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think I'll be careful because I don't want to get out and over skis as we discuss like how to define it. Maybe what I would say is carefully and collaboratively. Much like so, I think you've hit on the high points here, which are that so we've got the high level principles that are out for consultation until January 22nd. Criteria the work on that starts post, high level principle consultation. I think then the work on the criteria starts after that. I would say as much like we've done with leading up to Abu Dhabi, then post Abu Dhabi on the development from the areas of focus to the high-level principles, I think feedback from members, but also stakeholders will be an important element to the development of the criteria. So I think the feedback we get now, and then the feedback that we get, Vicky, on how we I think work through the language of over business cycles will be important. So I won't say too much on it. I don't want to kind of set parameters necessarily, but feedback from members and stakeholders will be an important part to this process.
Thanks very much, Gary. Totally agree. Feedback very important. Jonathan, back to you, unless any of the colleagues on the panel want to add. No, back to you.
Good. Well, we also received some questions around our macroprudential work, and so we can direct us at Dieter. The first question is in relation to the work on liquidity metrics. So in the consultation on liquidity metrics, it is announced that in 2021, the IAIS will assess instruments issued by financial institutions. What is your objective and philosophy on this topic? So that's question number one. And question number two is, what will the IAIS release on the COVID-19 data collection? Will the IAIS publicly release results? Over to you, Dieter.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, on the first question, I'm afraid I cannot give too many details, but in line of our thinking, of course, the first step here in this liquidity metric approach that we took is to set up an exposure approach where we look at the liquidity characteristics of the liquidity sources and the liquidity needs of an insurance company's balance sheet. And as part of these liquidity sources, we have identified, for instance, as a potential liquidity source, the investment-grade corporate debt securities. At least for applying a factor of 70%, these debt securities are recognized as a liquidity source. One question we have to ask ourselves is whether we should put all corporate debt securities into one pool, and whether there is to be a consideration made on having a separate treatment or not for financial corporate debt securities, bearing in mind this interconnected aspect to other parts of the financial sector, which may also be hit in case there would be a liquidity strain. I don't have any a priori, let's say, answers to this question. What we know is that we have collected for the first time data in scope of the 2020 individual insurer monitoring exercise. So for the first time, we can have a separate look at these things, because you need data to analyze it. And based on that, we'll carry forward our work on this and see whether a different treatment is something that is desired or not. Additionally, here one small aspect is that we will also look at time deposits and whether we can also consider time deposits as a potential source of liquidity. Related to your second question, Jonathan, what will we publish with regard to the COVID-19 reporting? Well, I think everyone can expect a report which focuses, as I said before, on these 5 key areas: as the asset side, liability side, solvency, liquidity, etc. And we will zoom into each of these aspects. I think we will describe very high level, on an aggregate level, the impacts that we have seen thanks to our data collection. We will discuss also risk mitigation measures which were set up by insurers, and we hope by describing this that we will give an overview of how the global insurance sector was impacted by COVID-19, at least until the date of Q2 2020, because I think, as said before, the story isn't finished yet, and in this sense, we know that our monitoring efforts will continue, and we will have a data collection also representing the end of 2020. And if need be, we will of course update our analysis. So there's not much more I can say at this stage on the report, other than I would of course invite everybody to keep a close eye on when this will be published on the website of the IAIS coming soon, and I hope that by giving back some insights into our analysis, that we also keep incentivizing everyone to participate in this data collection. So, Jonathan, maybe back to you.
Thank you very much, Dieter. So some very interesting work going on there. I'm going to turn now to Peter, chair of the IAC, who hasn't had some questions yet. So there is one. How will the IAIS approach to implementation assessment change due to COVID-19? You know, around things like the process and what you will look at. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Happy to have questions on implementation assessment as well. So on the impact of COVID on our part of the work and the mandate, let me go along with the 4 pillars I mentioned before. Let's say on the implementation and assessment itself, what is not so much in the focus, what is not much impacted by the crisis is, of course, the self-assessment tool, and the PRPs are more or less going on as planned. On the member assessment programs, we have had some delay. Of course, there are more interactive exchange is necessary, but this is a more broader concept, so we're still happy to move on with that. On the capacity building side, I'm happy that it was possible, together with our partners, within a very short time period, to switch most of the activities, not all, but I would say most of the activities into the virtual formats. And what is important, equally important, is to look on what are the new topics, what are supervisors most concerned about, what keeps them awake at night in this crisis situation. So both the formats and the content of what we deliver together with our partners in that respect has been adapted within a relatively short time period. The outcome on supporting material was a little bit delays here and there, but I would say not something which is too dramatic on this perspective. The supervisory cooperation part goes on more or less as planned because this is the whole accession process to the MMOU is done or to large extent remotely, and so this was not so much impacted by that. For the future, I'm optimistic, but we also have to say we have formats of our, particularly capacity building. We have formats where the physical interaction is still and will continue to be a major part or a key element of the whole process. So it would not be fair to say everything is moving on, just we switch it to virtual and just get exactly the same results. I mean, this would not be fair to conclude. So we do now, we intend to put everything that's possible on virtual format, but we are still hoping to get back to at least some physical interaction later next year. Thank you, Jonathan. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much, Peter. We've also had a question, a sort of general question around will the IAIS consider additional opportunities for discussion with stakeholders on topics such as cyber risk, climate risk, and financial inclusion next year? And perhaps Vicky might want to answer that one. In the meantime, there was also, let me quickly deal with a factual question, which was, will the draft culture paper be available to stakeholders and for public consultation next year? So there to update you, the plan is to issue that draft paper for consultation in around June next year, and then to aim to finalize it and publish it in November next year. But back to Vicky, I must say we've always put a lot of emphasis on stakeholder engagement and have been building on that. But Vicky, is there anything you'd like to add on this topic?
The short answer to the question is yes. As Jonathan has said, sort of stakeholder engagement remains an important pillar of our strategy. there are going to be direct opportunities to engage on these issues. So, for example, on climate at the moment, the paper on the application paper, which is the guidance to supervisors paper on how to supervise climate risks, is out for consultation. So there is a sort of specific and direct engagement there. As it has already been said, we also are planning to publish in the first part of the year a risk assessment piece through our GMA publication on financial stability risks from climate change. So comments that people might have on this piece and what we get right, or how can we improve it, and also what we didn't quite get right, would be very welcome. And of course, data on cyber, as mentioned, we're just about to publish a paper on cyber underwriting and issues around it. So comments on that specific paper would be very helpful. And we have set up a group that's going to look at operational resilience more broadly, including cyber risk more broadly as well, and is going to be working over the course of next year on a paper for consultation there. And ditto on financial inclusion, where I guess some of our work on the protection gap is at quite early stages. So if people want to have to throw in ideas about some of the issues that we've discussed today that would be very welcome. And on broader inclusion, again, I mentioned some issues, and Gary did as well, that we are thinking, and our member jurisdictions are also thinking and are doing work on. So again, we are at an earlier stage there. So any kind of work or ideas that you might have, again, welcome. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Vicky. And I can only echo those comments. There's now a couple of questions around ICS. Let's start with the first question. I have to do lots of scrolling now. There's been a lot of questions. The first question is, would the IAIS consider publishing further details on how parts of the ICS has been calibrated? And then there is another similar question around, will the IAIS discuss the aggregate data from the ICS monitoring period? So I think a sort of common question around what will be made more public on the calibration and the results of the ICS at which stage.
Jonathan, do you want me to have a go at this, or?
Yes, please.
And I mean, Gary, if you want to sort of add or correct, I mean so the timetable is that so the monitoring period is started at the beginning of this year and ends in 2024, and we are going to be using the experience that we're gaining through the monitoring period in order to be able to look at whether the sort of design of the ICS meets the purpose for which it has been designed, or it needs to be, or changes need to be made to it. And before we consult on, if you want, the final ICS, not the ICS version 2.0, but the ICS that will become the PCR. So that means, and we need to be able to have been doing this consultation in 2023, so that we can complete the ICS in 2024. And quite clearly, when we consult at that stage, we will need to be consulting on calibrations as well. Now, in the intervening period between the end of 2020, which is the current period, and 2023, we can, of course, we have set a high bar on making any design changes, including calibration changes to what we published last year, to the ICS version 2.0. But there's still a possibility of this happening depending on the results of the monitoring period, but there is a high bar. We have set sort of a high bar test. I can't remember the exact wording we used at the time, but the concept is that there is a high bar to making changes. And the reason for that is because we need some stability in the construct as we are looking, as we're monitoring it over that particular period. So if we keep on making changes to it, then we can't see how it behaves. Now, a sort of interesting development that happened with this rather nasty virus, which has turned out to be a good thing for our monitoring of the ICS, is that we had a very, very nasty market shock, and in some respects policyholder on the liability side in certain lines, but it was a very nasty market shock in March and April that hit global insurers. So it is important that as many IAGs participate as possible to provide us with 2020 data, so that we can look at how the ICS construct has behaved through this period of market volatility. But that shock, actually, for the pure purposes of monitoring the ICS, gives us quite an important data point. So participation is going to be key. I don't know, Gary, if you want to add anything or correct, and Jonathan as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Vicky, and I can be very brief. And maybe just building upon what you had said, a couple of focus areas, stakeholders and transparency that are issues that come up. I would just highlight that there's the Stakeholder Session in February that will be held, and assume that that would be when information is provided at that point. I also think that both ICS and ComFrame indicate that there is some expectation of transparency of the ICS and in what form that takes in terms of both public and supervisory colleges is something that we're still working on, of course. But certainly the expectation is greater transparency and disclosure within supervisory colleges. Right now, during the monitoring period, there's no public use, of course, of ICS numbers themselves. I think once we get past the monitoring period, there'll be more discussions about what, if any, aspects of the ICS data will be made public. But at this point, both ICS and AM will be issues discussed in colleges, which will be helpful both for comparability and for calibration purposes. So I think those are a couple areas that I would highlight. Thanks, Vicky.
Important areas. Thanks, Gary. Jonathan, anything to add or refine?
Well, I think in case this wasn't covered. I think there was a specific question around some of the calibrations, and just to be clear, there is an idea of publishing some calibration papers later in the monitoring period, and the purpose of those papers will be precisely to give some further insight on how the ICS calibrates these risks. So that's and that will be for each different risk module. So that's work in progress, and that's part of, as we said, this commitment to transparency and getting feedback as well. So that will, that's still under further discussion, but that is, I think, the plan at least. So we certainly didn't have to worry about not getting enough questions for this session. So we got a whole lot of questions, but unfortunately we haven't got to all of them. But we are doing very well in sticking to our schedule, which is important because we do have a very important next part of the Town Hall session coming up as well. So thank you to everyone for the great questions. Even the ones that we didn't get to, we have a record of them, and those will make for very good food for thought as we take forward our work next year. We're now at the point in the agenda where we say thank you very much for those questions, and hand over back to Vicky, who will have the very nice task of announcing this year's Distinguished Fellows. Thank you, Vicky.